What are we so afraid of? And how do we know when we aren't as fearful as we used to be? Here's how: tests. Join us today to see why fear actually might be a good thing. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Genesis series. I'm glad you are joining us today. We've been working our way through Genesis for a long time. This is actually lesson 49. We're apparently never getting through Genesis, the rate I'm going. We're going to be working through Genesis 26 today. So I want to talk a little bit about fear to begin with, and I'll start with this story. A few months ago, we were watching a football game, and it was interesting how the kicker, never made a goal. Like, he just never kicked it through the goalpost. He just never did. And so it was time now for the kicker to go in and kick the winning kick with just a couple seconds left in the game, which of course we were worried. We were like going, we're never going to win this game if it's up to him. And we were wondering why we were so worried, and it was because we had no faith, we had no trust in the kicker. We couldn't trust him to actually kick the football through the goalpost, because up until now, he hadn't done that. And because of that, we actually couldn't trust him, and so we became fearful that we would lose the game. But imagine this. Imagine if that particular kicker had put the football through the goalpost every single time. Every time that particular game, every time the games before. Like, he never ever missed. We would have no fear. We would have no worry. Why? Because we fully trusted the kicker. Now, the question for us then is, why do we worry so much? Why are we afraid of things that are so out of control? Like, we can't control the kicker to kick. We don't like being out of control. But it could be this. Maybe we don't trust the one who controls the outcome of the game of life, which is God himself. Maybe we don't trust him, and when we don't trust him, we become fearful. And if we don't really know, we don't know him, and we don't know that he can do anything, then we're going to be afraid during life. And in today's lesson, and actually next week's lesson, we're going to see how this plays out. So let's pick this up in Genesis 26, verse 1. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine, and that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Now, the reason why we put this particular picture on the screen here is because this is actually Israel. And as you can see, there's a lot of desert. This is down by the Dead Sea, but it's desert. And at this particular time, there was a famine. There was no food, and that can be very, very scary. And Isaac and Rebecca, who we're talking about, they're going to actually do something out of fear. A test is going to come. The famine is a test. God is really good at giving us tests. Because here's what we know. A test is what shows us where we are spiritually. And for Isaac and Rebecca, we're going to see that they are going to fail this test miserably. And it's because of this, because they don't really think God can help them with what they need. And I think we are afraid a lot of times in life because we think the exact same way. We just don't think God's going to come through for us. We don't think that he actually is big enough. We don't think he cares enough about us. We think he's too busy with people who really, truly need help. So instead of trust this big God to do what we can't, we worry. That's just what we do. And I get that, and I get what it feels like to worry. Now, I told this story in my lesson, many, many lessons ago. So if you have been keeping up with this, you're going to be like, oh, Lisa forgot she already told this story. But I actually remember that I told you that, but I'm just telling you that because I know you think I've like lost my mind. So there you go. I can't remember anything. My son, it was Sean's birthday last week, and he said, Mom, he goes, let's take a trip down memory lane. Like, what was it like the day you had me? And I'm like, are you kidding? That's 39 years ago. Like, I can't even remember what I did like 20 minutes ago, all right? So anyway, but I do remember that I have told this story to you. But many, many years ago, we hired a man when we had our business. And he was supposed to, we were going to hire him, and he was going to bring all of his business. He was moving across the country, and he would bring his business, and then we would merge our businesses together, and that would be a good thing. But the problem is, he got here, and he never brought any of his business. And so here we're stuck with paying for him. There's no business to actually pay for his salary. And we were running out of money. And I was terrified. I was so worried that I literally thought I was having a heart attack. Now, I would sit in front of my TV and we would watch it. And I would start thinking that we didn't have any money. And my heart would pound out of my chest. So this went on a couple weeks, and then one night I was so convinced I was having a heart attack because, of course, I looked it up on the internet, and the internet told me that how I was feeling was really actually a heart attack. Elephant on my chest, heart was hurting. So the next morning I went to the heart hospital. The test came out fine. And the doctor said, "Are you worried about something? Are you stressed about something?" And I literally burst into tears, and I'm like, yes, I'm worried about everything. And it's funny, at the time, I had no idea how worry and anxiety affects our body. But I learned a valuable lesson that day. I needed to do something with my worry. Because Jesus tells us that that is no way to live. He's like, I have such a better way for you to live life. Because here's the problem. Here's what worry is. Worry is concern and anxiety over the future. We worry about what's going to happen tomorrow or the day after tomorrow or 3 weeks from now. And I get that. Like, it's so funny. We just bought a new house. And for those of you who keep up, I talk about it a lot. But the thing with this house is that it was such a God thing. Like, it just was. I can't even tell you. I knew that because this house was such a God thing, that the minute we put our old house up on the market, like, there would be a line out front waiting, people waiting to buy it. But within a month of us buying the new house and selling the old house, apparently the housing market in Arizona, and probably most of the United States, kind of just crashed. And there is no line. And now there are a gazillion homes around us that are for sale. And the once 3% interest rate is now about 11% on a jumbo loan if someone wants to buy a house that's over a specific amount of money. And on top of that, this is funny, we have amazing views at where we're at the old house, but we have flagstone floors. Who wants flagstone floors? Most people want updated wood floors and tile, but flagstone? Like, I don't know. I don't even know if there's a market out there for that. On top of it, it's a 3-bedroom house. It's perfect for like a retired couple and maybe, I don't know, 1 grandchild. The other part is you have to cross a wash. Now, the wash, of course, doesn't run that much because it doesn't rain that much in Phoenix. But when it does, you need to make sure you're at your house or on the other side, wherever you want to be for a couple hours. But then you start thinking, who wants that? And suddenly, I'm thinking, uh-oh, I don't know that this is going to be the easiest house to sell. But what is so amazing is that I'm just not worried. I don't know why. And I think it's because I know God can do anything. I know He can bring a buyer who loves flagstone floors, and God's going to bring them at the right time. I know he will. Now, it may be 2 years from now when the economy comes back. I don't know. We just don't know. But I do know that God is going to take care of us financially. But this is how I know that God has changed me so much. Because through all of this, we now have 2 homes in a market that people aren't buying anything. And you know what? I don't feel like I'm having a heart attack. I just don't. Because there's something about going through Genesis like we've been going through. And it's reminded me of how powerful of a God that we have. He can do anything. He can create, galaxies, and he can create a giraffe, for crying out loud. He can flood the earth just like that. He can make a 90-year-old woman pregnant after the childbearing years are gone. What Genesis has taught me is nothing is too difficult for him. Nothing. But somehow we don't see God like that. We think God can't possibly do what we need him to do. So I want to start off with a story that Kent Crockett tells in his book, The Sure Cure for Worry. Now, this is another story that I know I have told you. Now, what I can't remember is when, because we do a lot of series. We've done Acts and Revelation and Luke, and we do a lot of series here. So I know I told this to you, I just can't remember, but we also have new viewers all the time. So this will hopefully be a new story to a lot of you. But it's just this reminder that God really can do anything and is in control of everything. He tells a story. After reading the story, I went back to his book because I thought, did this really happen? Or where did he get this story from? And it actually is a friend of Kent's. He says, I've known this guy for 25 years. So I was like, all right, here we go. The guy's name is Pete Schultes. He was 26 years old. He had a fiance. Her name was Linda. Linda was like, hey, we need to go to this, church service at this Baptist church in Huntington, West Virginia. Well, they kind of lived far away from this. And Pete's like, I don't really want to go. And Linda's like, but I promised my friend we would be there. So he's like, all right. Never been to the church before. It was in another city. So of course, they'd have to drive there. But he gave in because she was very persistent. He says this, little did he know that his reluctant visit to an unfamiliar church would be like starring in an episode of The Twilight Zone. So they pull up to this white stucco building. It was located in the residential Guanadette neighborhood. And as they walk in, this girls' choir is singing, and that's what they did before the pastor got up to preach. So Pete was watching the piano player to his right just play the piano, wasn't thinking anything. And all of a sudden, a voice speaks to his mind, not of course audibly, but it was so clear to him. And it said, you're going to marry the girl on the far left end of the choir. And he was like, where did that even come from? What was that? So Pete turned over to see who was singing in this spot in the choir, and he said it was this little slender, curly-haired brunette girl that was about 16 years old. So she's standing there. She's standing next to a girl that's a little bit larger than her, but could actually have been her sister. And he's thinking, that was the most bizarre thing I have ever heard in my life. I mean, I'm 26. I'm going to marry a teenage girl that I've never met before. He's like, are you joking? I'm engaged to Linda, who's sitting next to me. I have no intention of marrying anyone else, he thought. But it bothered him. Why would this crazy thought even come into his mind? He said, yet the words were so clear and so cutting that he couldn't even deny that he heard them. So his next thought was, maybe it was the devil. Maybe it was the devil speaking to him, or was it a message from God? So he prays, he's like, Lord, what was that? She's a 16-year-old high school kid. I'm 26. Hello, Linda's sitting next here. Is this kind of a test? And he said, God was silent. He said, God, I don't get this. Did I just conjure this thought up? Am I nervous to marry Linda? Again, silence. He couldn't pay attention to the rest of the sermon that night, but after the service ended, he and Linda just left and got in their car, and that was it. I never thought about it again. Several weeks passed. Pete and Linda continued to plan their wedding, but they both started feeling really uneasy about their decision to get married. They'd been feeling uncomfortable. It wasn't like they were fighting. They just something was off, something they just knew wasn't right. And so Linda suggested that maybe they should call off the wedding. And Pete reluctantly admitted that, that was probably the right thing to do. So they broke up. Shortly after that, Pete moves to another city, Charleston, West Virginia, and he becomes associate pastor at Perot Memorial Presbyterian Church. But breaking up with Linda was so heartbreaking for him, and he was so sad, and he kind of felt like half of his world had just been ripped away from him. And he kept thinking, maybe if I just give her some more time, our feelings will come back together and we'll get back together. But that never happened. For the next couple years, he continued to minister as a single man, but he felt really lonely and sad. He really, really wanted to get married. But in spite of trying to find a wife and go on dates, not a single dating relationship worked out. One lonely night, he sat down and calculated that he dated 13 girls, and all 13 of them married the guy that they dated after him. So he's like, I'm really good at finding, wives for other men, but just not for myself. Now it's been 8 years. 8 years since he moved to Charleston. He's now 34 years old. He went to, lunch one day and came back to the church that he works, Perot, pulls into the church parking lot just as a car pulls in next to him. He gets out, this girl gets out, and she's like, hey, hi, my name's Robin. She goes, I'm thinking about attending the church, so I made an appointment with the pastor to see what exactly, to answer my questions. So Pete invited her in, showed her to the pastor's office, and she starts attending the church. Over the next month, Pete and Robin, they were just cordial friends or whatever. They kind of talked. He was thoroughly thrilled to find she was single. But as they continued to talk, she asked one day, she said, Pete, can you come to church with me? I need to go back to home for an Easter service in Huntington, which is now an hour's drive from Charleston. So Pete's mind, he flashes back to 8 years ago where he went to a church in Huntington and there was a young choir girl. He's like, I'd never even thought about this since that time. And it just dawned on him, is it even possible? What are the odds that Robin would be that girl? And so he looks at her and he says, your old church. He's like, what does the church building look like? And she goes, well, it's in a white stucco building in the Guyanadette neighborhood. And he's just like, oh my gosh. And then he's thinking, okay, there's got to be a lot of churches that are white stucco. So he probes further to her and he says, did your church have a youth choir? And she's like, absolutely. She goes, I sang in the church choir. He goes, where did you stand? And she's like, why are you asking me these things? He goes, well, I always stood at the left. I was the very far left girl. And my sister always was right next to me. And she would help me stay on key. And he was so shocked. He couldn't even believe it. And when they went to the church, he realized it was the exact church that God told him 8 years ago that he would marry that girl who showed up in a different town at a different church that he was working at 8 years later. So now he's 34 and she's what does that make her? 20-ish, okay, 24, and he was 30, whatever. But the point to this is this. God is that big. God can do anything. God knew Pete was engaged to the wrong woman, Linda. So he plants this girl in his mind at its random church service that they didn't even go to that church. And then God made sure that both Pete and Linda would start feeling uncomfortable about getting married. And so the engagement was called off. And then during those 8 years, God closes every single door, okay, for Pete to marry someone else. And then 8 years later, God guides Robin to the exact church in the exact parking lot at the exact time that Pete is getting out of his car. So they end up getting married. And it's this beautiful story of it's a beautiful love story, but more than that, it's a beautiful story of the sovereignty and the leading and guiding of God. And when I know that, you know what? I don't worry about flagstone floors. I know God has a buyer for our home. And I don't know, he's weaving people in and out to get to the house. I don't know what that looks like. Could happen tomorrow, like I said, could happen 4 years from now. But I have learned that God can be trusted no matter what. This morning, Rob woke up and I told him a long time ago, he wakes up and he looks at articles, world articles, what's going on in the United States. And he usually wakes up and tells me the bad news. So finally one day I said, okay, you got to stop that. I don't want to wake up and hear bad economic news. And so he doesn't. But this particular morning, because our house is on the market, he said, Lisa, the housing market has gone down 50% because of the interest rates. And my first thought was, but we have a big God. And even though there's only 50% of people building or buying houses, at least there's someone that could possibly be in there. So my point to this whole story is a reminder that if worry is consuming your life, you need to stop. Because you have a big God that can do anything that he needs to get you to the place where you need to get and to get your life to the place where he needs you to be. I tend to worry a lot about my weight, which is kind of funny. But here's a great statistic about those who worry about their weight. Elephants live longer than people because they never worry about trying to lose weight. I was like, I need to remember that. Okay, I need to remember that. But we worry about everything. What if I never get married? What if I fall out of love with the person I did marry? What if something is wrong with my baby? What if my teenager gets on drugs? What if my husband or child dies? What if you just fill in your own blank? And Jesus knows that worry is a big problem. He knows it today because it was a big problem back when he was on the earth 2,000 years ago. And here's the problem with worry. It is because worry is about the future. And what does Jesus say in Matthew 6:22? He said, "For this reason I say to you, do not worry about your life as to what you're going to eat or your body or what you will put on. For life is more than food and the body more than clothing." We can add, life is more than elections or the school you're going to go to or your marriage. And he goes on to say in verse 28, "But if God so clothes the grass in the field, which is alive now and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, how much more will he clothe you, you men of little faith? And do not seek what you will eat and what you will drink. Do not keep worrying." Why? Verse 30 says it, "For all these things the nations of the world eagerly seek, but your Father knows that you need these things. He will take care of you." And we need to remember that as we're going along in this life. Here's what you need to know. He'll take care of you. It may not be a mansion on the beach. It may be food from a food pantry. But it all comes down to trusting God to take care of us, who will provide for us. When? Today. I always wake up and I say, you know what, Rob? We have enough money in the bank today. You know what, Rob? We have a roof over our head today. I don't need to worry about what's going to happen tomorrow or a year from now. Jesus says, hey, worry about the 24 hours that you're in. And I think that's the key to stop worrying. Verse 25, Jesus says, "And which of you by worrying can add a single hour to his lifespan?" Does worrying add anything to your life? Days? No. Does worrying make your life better? No. Does worrying make your life peaceful and calm? It doesn't. So here is how I stopped worrying. I began to realize this, that most things in life we're worried about are out of our control. They just are. We can work out and eat healthy. That does not guarantee we're going to live longer. I hear of people go, oh, they were so healthy and they died at a young age. I'm like, well, that's why I drink Dr. Pepper. They go, well, they worked out at the gym all the time and they had a heart attack. I'm like, yep, that's why I don't work out. make excuses for anything. But working out and eating healthy doesn't even guarantee a long life. Some of you can work hard at your job, but you know what? If your company downsizes, you have no control over that. You may lose your job. We can tell about our kids about Jesus, take them to church, put them at church camp. That doesn't mean they're actually going to follow him themselves. We can put money in the stock market. No control over the economy. None whatsoever. We can drive our car and be very safe and never text and drive, but we have no control over the person coming towards us that is texting. We can fly in a plane. Hopefully it makes it on the ground. See, we have no control over any of these things. And the problem is we don't like that. We want to be in control. Back in 1997, the USA Today reported that the Department of Transportation set aside $200 million for researching and testing of an automated highway system. And so what they wanted to do was put the super cruise control built into the highways where there was high traffic congestion. So what they were going to do is they wanted to put magnets underneath, and when you hit this particular congested area, you would not have control over your car anymore. But the magnets would control your speed and where you turn right or left and all of those kind of things. And it would help the traffic get through the way it was supposed to. But the problem is that even though the drivers would resume control of their own cars, as soon as they passed these magnets, there was one problem that they couldn't overcome. And it was getting people comfortable with giving up control. Here you go. The problem was not technology. The problem is trust. Very few people would be willing to give up that kind of control. And I thought, yep, I get that. Because as followers of Jesus, when you and I decide to become a Christian, to give our life to him, what we're saying in essence is, I'm giving up control of my life to you. God, you are running my life. I'm giving it to you. And there is something really peaceful about knowing that God, who is in control over everything, is running my life. And when I read stories about Pete and Robin, that for 8 years he can't find a wife, but all along God knew exactly what he was doing. Those years for him became a test from God. And so I want to talk about this because here's what you need to know. True faith must be tested. We hate that because we hate that saying, but it's actually really true. At our new house, Rob built, so we live where there's a wash. And so Rob worked on this road. He's working on it for weeks. And he put these culverts in and he's got these steel things in so that when this wash starts running, we'll be able to get over the wash and get home instead of not being able to get home. So when these storms hit, it can be very devastating to people. So I was thinking about this and I thought, I need to show you what this looks like. We live out in New River in Arizona. And like I said, it doesn't rain that much, but when it does and when these storms come from the north, oh my gosh, those washes start running. So I want to show you what it looks like. So if I'm ever not at Bible study, people will be like, oh yeah, Lisa's on the other side of this wash. But this is what the washes out in New River look like. I'm putting the link below because, of course, I can't put this actually in the lesson. If you want to see it, it scared me so bad after I saw this. I'm like, maybe I should move. But if you want to watch that video, it's there. If you don't, just suffice to say, there's a lot of water going through here. But Rob's been working weeks and weeks to get this road done. But here's the deal, and I told him the other day. He said, I need it to rain. And I said, the rain is going to be the test. The washes running will be the test to see if that culvert is going to pass the test. But it's going to take rain. It's going to take a very, very heavy rain to test to see if that's going to work. And I said, Rob, it's kind of like our faith. Until we run out of money, until we run out of love in our marriage, until we get laid off from our job, until it rains, okay? We don't know if we're going to pass this trusting God test. So we often wonder, why are these bad things happening to me? I'm a Christian. Good things should be happening, not bad things. But God brings tests into our lives, and they don't feel very good. A rainstorm and those washes running aren't going to feel very good to my wash, but it's going to test our culverts to see if they actually work. But here's the good thing. It's the tests that show us where we are in our faith. It's the tests that show us, are we growing in our faith? Are we staying stagnant in our faith? Or are we learning to trust God? Or are we still fearful? Have we changed inside? See, tests do that for us. This house for us is a huge test for me. And it showed me, oh my gosh, I don't think like I used to when I thought I was having a heart attack. God has really changed me, and now I just trust him. Jeremiah talks about this. Jeremiah 20:12, he says, but Lord of hosts, you who test the righteous. God tests us. Jeremiah 12:3, but you, O Lord, you know me. You have seen me, and you have tested my heart toward you. Jeremiah 17:10, I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind. So this is what God does. He tests us to see where we're at. God tests us to see whether we are real or whether we are fake. If our faith is real or if our faith is fake. Because whatever is inside of us will come out in a test. It will bring out the best in us, or it will bring out the worst in us. Here's a great story of a test. There was a young Army officer. His name was Lieutenant Blandford, and he was overseas, and he came home. He was home at a restaurant watching his watch, waiting for someone. And the someone that he was waiting for was a woman who had gotten his name and written to him while he was overseas and in battle. Lieutenant Blandford confessed to her, this woman, in one of his letters that he often felt fear. And days before his next battle, she had written him and she said, of course you fear. All brave men do. She said, next time you doubt yourself, I want you to hear my voice reciting this to you. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Those words strengthened him for the next battle. And now that he was home, he was going to meet the woman who he had been writing to for all these years. He'd never gotten a picture of her, and he didn't know what she looked like. She didn't know what he looked like. And so he was a little nervous about this. But at 4 minutes to 6, a girl passed him, but she didn't have a little red rose on her, that was the sign that this is who she was, and he would know that. But at 1 minute to 6, one more time, so another woman starts coming towards him, and she was beautiful. And she had this beautiful pale green suit on. He said it was like springtime coming alive. But he started towards her and realized she wasn't wearing a rose. So she passed him, and the woman directly behind him had a rose on. She was about 40. She was graying, her hair was graying. It was tucked up into a worn hat. The red rose was pinned to a rumpled coat. The girl in the green suit had passed by. Lieutenant Blandford was, of course, drawn to the girl in the green, but he looked at this woman and was drawn to her because of how God used her in his life to just help him during this time of war. So he looked at her and he said, I'm so happy to meet you. I'm the man you've been writing to all of these years. He realized that this might not be the love of his life, but they would have a very special friendship. So he said, you must be Miss Maynell. He said, I'm so glad to meet you. May I take you to dinner? The woman looked at him with a really questioning smile. And she said, I don't know what this is all about, but that young lady in the green suit begged me to wear this rose on my coat. And she told me, if you ask me out, if you ask her out, to go out with you, then I'm supposed to tell you that she is waiting for you at the restaurant across the street. I thought that was just a sweet story about tests. She told me it's just kind of a test. See, he's never going to know how this woman would feel about him, whoever she was. Would she treat this other woman differently than if the girl in the green had actually shown up first? She wanted to know his heart. And that's what God does for us. He wants to know our heart, and he tests us in that way. Tests are God's way to help us grow up in our faith. Rob would be the first one to tell you that he has a problem with patience. He's a type A personality. But God keeps putting tests in his life like people, okay? but people that aren't a type A personality. But the other day he said to me, he goes, you know what, Lisa? He goes, I feel like I'm handling people in a kinder, gentler way. Because the tests are what's showing him how to treat people differently. And he's the nicest guy in the whole world. But tests come in all different forms. They just do. Maybe for you, your test is you don't have enough money. Maybe you stress and you worry about it, but you can relax because God wants you to trust him with that. I was talking about Elizabeth Elliot a couple weeks ago and her husband Jim. They were the missionaries to the Aka Indians in Ecuador. Someone came up to me the next week and handed me a book about a relative of hers who also were missionaries in Ecuador at the same time, Frank and Marie Drown. He wrote a book called Mission to the Headhunters. And he was actually on the rescue team that helped find Jim Elliot and his men, the other men that had been murdered. But when he was younger, when this Frank Drown was younger, he and Marie knew they were supposed to be missionaries to the Indians in Ecuador. But they had no funds. This is in the 1940s, all right? So they knew they were called, but they didn't have any way to get there. And so what happened was the small little church that they'd gone to said that they would pay for their minimum support, but they needed $598 for the airline reservations to get them to Ecuador. But they had no money. It's not like they knew anybody. And so they were waiting for the postman to arrive one day. He was handing out letters to all the families. And they were hoping to get a letter from their parents. But there was none. There was just this one little envelope that looked like it was from a business. And they were sad. And they opened it up. But they were shocked to see a check for $600 fall out. And see, it's just this reminder that God is that big. He can put things on people's heart to help you if you are financially in trouble. He can open doors you never even knew he could open. Everybody goes through tests in life. But as followers of Christ, we have a choice on how we're going to respond to that. We are either going to trust God or we're going to trust ourselves. So today, we're just going to see how this plays out with Isaac and Rebekah. Because something scary happens to them, and it's going to show them how they're doing spiritually. Because for them, the test is going to come in the form of a famine, no food. Suddenly, Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Esau are their two boys. And Jacob and Esau are about 30 at the time. And we're going to assume that they're with their parents, so that's the four of them. But are they going to stay and trust God, or out of fear, are they going to run away? And what we're going to see is they're going to do exactly what Isaac's dad, Abraham, did, and that is run away. If you remember when we first met Abraham, he moved to Canaan. The first thing that happened was a famine. And I don't believe Abraham probably even knew God well enough to where he could trust him. So Abraham goes running to Egypt. Because Egypt is the place where there's food. Egypt was considered the breadbasket of the known world. It had the Nile River. It had great soil. People could grow things. But Abraham did not stay in Canaan and trust God, but instead he ran to Egypt. He lied to Pharaoh. He lied to Pharaoh out of fear. He said, "Oh no, my wife is my sister." He got in a whole lot of trouble. And what we see here is like father, like son, because son, Isaac, is going to do the exact same thing. Out of fear, he wants to go to Egypt. Look at Genesis 26:1. Now there was a famine in the land besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. You can see this map that I put up here. He was down in Beer Lahai Roi at the very, very bottom. You can see over there to the right, the Dead Sea. That's what's behind us here. So he goes up to Gerar. This is where he is. But I want you to look at verse 2. And the Lord appeared to him. The Lord appeared to him. God shows up. I don't know how, but he says to him, do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land that I'm going to tell you to. Here's another map. You can see here over to the left over here, you see all these things. You see Egypt all the way down the far left. If you go up a little ways, you can see Shur, and then you can see Gerar. So Gerar is very, very close to Egypt, and God's saying, do not go the distance. Do not go down there to Egypt. I need you to stay here and trust me. And if you do, this is what he says to him in verse 3. He says, sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. He said in verse 4, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven, and will give to your offspring all of these lands, and in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham, your father, obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So Isaac listened and settled in Gerar. But then we see something really weird. He gets scared in Gerar. He becomes fearful, and he does something really dumb, like lies. But remember, the Lord had just appeared to him. The Lord has never appeared to me in person. But I would assume if he did, I would never worry about anything ever again. But everything in the Bible that we read says that's not true. All we have to do is look at Moses going down to Egypt to get all the Israelites out. And God rained down the most amazing, miraculous events this world has ever seen. But do you think the Israelites rested? Were not fearful, knowing that God would take care of them? Nope, didn't happen. They were terrified. They whined, they cried. We're like, are you joking? Did you not just see the Nile turn to blood, or the hail, or the frogs, or the gnats? Did you just not see the firstborn die who did not have blood on their doorposts? Did you not see plague after plague that affected the Egyptians but not the Israelites? Did you not see that? See, God showed up in ways that you and I could never even imagine. And then to top it off, God literally parts the Red Sea. So the Israelites can cross over. Then the Egyptians cross over. The water comes over, kills all the Egyptians. We always hear people say, but if God would just show up and tell me what to do, I would do it and I would always follow him. I don't think so. The Lord just showed up to Isaac, and he's about ready to lie out of fear. The Israelites saw the most spectacular show of miraculous events, and they were still afraid, and they still didn't trust him. They actually said, did God bring us out of Egypt to make us die in the wilderness? We're like, what is wrong with these people? But then it dawned on we might be just like them. Because here's what I know. God can sell a house in a down market. God can make sure that someone gets pregnant or heals a sickness. And he can do all of those things. But in 2 days after he does it, if we get that bill in the mail, we're like, oh my gosh, God's not going to take care of me. See, I think we're a lot more like the Israelites than we would like to think. But what's amazing is that even though the Lord appears to him, Isaac is going to lie because he's afraid that God's not going to take care of him. After God just showed up and told him that he's going to make this great nation out of him. Look what he does in verse 7. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, He said just what his dad said. She's my sister. For he feared. He was afraid. He said, my wife thinking, lest the men of this place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. Why in the world wouldn't he say, this is my beautiful wife, Rebekah. We are followers of the one true God. He has led us here. We are trusting him to protect us. Why in the world would he lie? But the weird thing is that Isaac learned this tactic probably from his father, Abraham. Because his dad not only lied once, but twice, that is in the scripture. And Isaac must have learned from him. So I want to move and talk about something that a lot of churches teach. A lot of churches teach that there are such thing as a generational curse. And they think that because their parents did something that we're cursed to do the same thing. And I want you to know, if you're a follower of Jesus, that's absolutely not true. You are not cursed with anything. You don't need to get your generational curse exorcised out of you. It doesn't work that way. The reason they say this is Exodus 20, verse 4. This is back when the Israelites were wandering, the law, all of this was going on. It says, you shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the father to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. Now, I want you to look at those last two words, of those who hate me. He's talking about unbelievers. The generational things are about unbelievers. But look at verse 6, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. We need to remember that. It doesn't matter what your parents, your grandparents, your great-great-grandparents did. Here's what 2 Corinthians 5:17 says. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone. Any generational anything is gone the minute you give your life to Christ. The new has come. But we live in a world where we want to make excuses for our behavior. It's easier to say, well, I have a generational curse on me than to say, no, I am a new creation. It's easier to say, it's my parents' fault for how I am, instead of saying, no, no, no. Colossians 1:13, for he has rescued me from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption and forgiveness of sins. We've moved from the darkness to the light the moment we gave our life to Christ. So what happens with Isaac is just like his daddy, just becomes fearful. And we see Isaac doing the same thing. But it's not a generational curse. Isaac didn't have to do what he saw his dad doing. He could have trusted God. And it's exactly the same for you and I. If you come from an alcoholic family or a family that's addicted to drugs, or you may have a propensity for alcohol and drugs. Maybe you were raised with a mom or dad who lied to get out of things. Maybe you were raised in a family where there was gossip and bitterness and anger. But now that you are a follower of Jesus, you don't have to do what your parents did. You don't have to act like them. The chain can be broken. Isaac never should have lied out of fear. He had a choice at that moment to break that chain, but he didn't. You don't have to be like your parents or grandparents, because you have the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, God himself living within you. You don't have any curses on you. You just have to learn to start making good and godly choices, which Isaac did not do. Genesis 26:8, when Isaac had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked down from a window and saw Isaac caressing his wife Rebekah. Caressing in a way that brothers and sisters don't do that. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, she's your wife? How then could you say she's my sister? Isaac said, well, because I thought lest I die because of her. See what fear did? Why would he not trust God to protect him? And yet I think we do this every single day of our life. We become so fearful that we react instead of remembering that we have a big God who can take care of things for us. Which goes back to the kicker at the beginning. Do we really trust God? Do we really know him well enough to trust him? Look at verse 10. Abimelech says, "What is this you've done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." It's a sad day when non-believers act more righteous than believers. It's a really sad day when a non-believer calls out a believer. But it's so funny because we think that God should have slapped Isaac upside the head. But instead, look what God does in verse 12. Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him because the Lord had a plan for Isaac's life, no matter how ridiculous Isaac was acting. And the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so the Philistines envied him. Isaac is in the land of Gerar. The famine's been over. Isaac stayed there, but it was causing so much problem because he was getting and gaining so much wealth. And so the people in Gerar did the most horrible things. Look at this in verse 15. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham, his father. Could you imagine? We've talked about this over and over in Genesis. It's hard to find water in Israel, and when you do, it's a big thing to find a well. And Abraham dug all these wells, and the men of Gerar went and filled them all with dirt. We're like, who does that? But what's amazing is that Abraham would have just gone nuts. But Isaac's more passive. He doesn't even call out Abimelech for it. Verse 16 says, "And Abimelech said to Isaac, 'Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we.' So Isaac departs. He doesn't fight. He doesn't put up a fight. He just leaves. He departs and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. Instead of fighting, he just takes the high road. And the high road is difficult. It really is. The low road is much more fun. I always say it's more fun on the low road because we can be angry and bitter and hateful and all that. We can be annoyed with people on the low road. My husband's really good at taking the high road. We pulled into Starbucks a couple weeks ago, and you pull in, but the line's over here. So when you pull in, you have to actually go up, go around, and come back and get in line. So as we're in line, this lady pulls up this way and puts on her blinker. She doesn't go down and get in line like everyone else. She puts on her blinker waiting for someone to let her in. Now, I'm totally annoyed because I'm on the low road. And I'm annoyed. I'm like, serious? What's wrong with her? Get in the line like everyone else. But my husband, who takes the high road always, he's the nicer of the two of us, he lets her in. And it's so cute. We get up to pay for our drink, and the lady at the counter said, "Oh, the woman in front of you has already paid for you." She said, "Thank you so much for letting her in." Okay, so I'm like, I'm the worst Christian around apparently. But we need more people who take the high road. And my husband's just one of those. I was laughing. I was looking for an illustration, a funny video or something on taking the high road. And I couldn't understand why everywhere that I was looking, the high road, it was talking about someone smoking marijuana and driving. And then I realized they were talking about getting high on the road. Okay, so I didn't put a video in on that. Let's continue so we can get through this. Verse 18, "And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father. But the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham, and he gave them names that his father had given him. So Isaac goes to redig these wells. But there's more tests coming Isaac's way. Verse 19, "When Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there was a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdmen." And they're saying, "The water's ours. The water's ours." So he called the name of the well Esek because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that also and called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there. He kept digging wells, and they wanted the wells. And all this, Isaac was just like, he never confronted them, it seemed like. He moved and dug another well, verse 22. They did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, saying, "For now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." From here, he went up to Beersheba. Here's a map here. You can see he goes from Beer-lahai-roi up to Gerar and now over to Beersheba. The test, move Isaac to the place that God needs him to be. Verse 24, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, "I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not." Isaac, stop being afraid. He says, "For I am with you, and I will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake." And look what Isaac does, verse 25. So he builds an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. This is the first altar we have ever seen Isaac build. And I think it's because of all the tests. All the tests. With each test, God moved him until he finally got him to the place where God needed him to be. And I think Isaac could look back over everything he's been through since he moved from Beer-lahai-roi, and he realizes this: the tests are what helped Isaac get to know God better and trust him more. And there, in Beersheba, where it says he pitched his tent, Isaac's servants dug a well. But then Abimelech shows back up. When Abimelech, in verse 26, went from Gerar with Ahuzah, his advisor, and Pichol, the commander of his army. Because remember, it wasn't like, this is my area, this is your area. These guys are military. They're going to fight for their water. They're going to fight for land. So the king of Gerar, Abimelech, brings the commander of the army. Verse 27, Isaac said to them, "Why are you here? Why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and you sent me away from you?" That's Isaac's view of it. But their view was different. They said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, let there be a sworn pact between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you, that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you and have done to you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord." Now, most people would have taken the low road, stayed on the low road, and said, "Absolutely not, get out of my town." But Isaac doesn't do that. Isaac is really more of a peacemaker. So here's what he does in verse 30. He made them a feast, and they ate and drank, and in the morning they rose and exchanged oaths. And Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. In verse 32, that same day, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well that they had dug and said, "We have found water." He called it Sheba, therefore the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. Isaac was peaceful, and he took the high road, and I believe God blessed him for that. Isaac handled Abimelech and his servants like Jesus tells us to do in Matthew 5:43. He says, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." That's what the world says. Don't let that lady in Starbucks. She's not doing it right. But verse 44, Jesus says, "But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Bless those who get in front of the line in Starbucks. Do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust." So many lessons in today's story. The takeaway is this. First, we have a big God who can do anything. You do not need to be fearful of anything. Let the test God puts in our path grow us up in our faith. Let when a test comes in, let's do this. With each test, let's not handle it like we used to. Let's stop and say, "All right, God, this is happening in my life. What do you want me to do? How do you want me to respond? How can I do this to where you're honored and I grow in my faith?" And I think when we start doing that, I think we're going to learn this, that we do not need to be afraid of anything. And we do not have to react out of fear like Isaac did. And the good thing about God is that he can take care of all of our problems. And just like Isaac, even our enemies. I hope that helps you today. Have a really good day as we continue next week with Genesis.